If you have your Bibles today, you can open them up to 2 Chronicles chapter 20. 2 Chronicles chapter 20. If you don't have your Bible here with you today, that's all right. We're going to put scriptures up on the screen behind me so you can follow along. But if you have it, 2 Chronicles chapter 20, while you're turning there, I just want to say hello to our online audience. I want to let you know that you matter. We love you. I can't see who exactly you are right now, but so grateful that you have tuned in. It just means a lot that you take time out of your weekend or wherever you are. Maybe you're traveling, or maybe you're uncertain about showing up to church live in person. The fact that you would have the courage to just tune in online right now means the world to us. Those of you that are part of Anchor, but you're away, or it's still camping, it's lake season, enjoy your last few weeks. Fall is coming, but enjoy your time away. But grateful to have you tune in. We are right now in a series called He is Worthy, and we've been on this for some time now, but it is essentially a series on worship. It's declaring how worthy God is, and we recognize His love, His grace, His worthiness, how it draws worship out of us. We've been talking a lot about how worship certainly is corporate. It's us coming together, and it's singing songs, and it's doing these what can be seen as religious activities as corporate acts of worship. But worship is so much bigger than that. Worship is individual. Worship is any time that we respond, we live in such a way that's a response to the goodness, the love of God, that is worship. Any moment, any decision we make, the way we spend our time, our money, our energy, our responses to certain situations, our decisions, these are all opportunities of worship, that we recognize the love of God and it affects the way that we behave. Our theme verse through this whole series has been Psalm 63, 3-5, that says, "Because your steadfast love is better than life, my lips will praise you. So I will bless you as long as I live. In your name I will lift up my hands. My soul will be satisfied as with fat and rich food, and my mouth will praise you with joyful lips." This has been our theme verse because even just the essence of that first sentence is that because of your steadfast love, it's better than life, my lips will praise you. Meaning that when circumstances are challenging, when I don't feel great, when my love is inconsistent, worship is drawn out of me all the same. Because worship isn't dependent on how I feel. Worship isn't dependent on what's going on in my life. Worship is dependent on His love. And His love is steadfast, it is consistent, it is enduring. If your ability to worship is based on how you feel or your love for God, it will be incredibly inconsistent and oftentimes non-existent. But if your worship is based on His love for you, there will always be reason to worship because He is always worthy no matter what's going on in your life. And what's so beautiful about when we worship, it says the end result is our souls are satisfied as with fat and rich food. Like our souls get the feast of a lifetime in the presence of God. That although our circumstances may be challenging, our souls find rest. Our souls find peace. Maybe you're here today and your soul is a bit restless. There's a lot of circumstances that are challenging to you. I want to tell you that it's not just the ease of circumstances that settles your soul. It's the presence of God. It's when you recognize His love for you and you live in a response to that love that your soul finds home, finds peace, even if circumstances are not going your way. We're jumping back into 2 Chronicles chapter 20 today. If you were with us 2 weeks ago, we studied verses 1-19, and then we paused the story midway. We had Baptism Sunday, and we're picking up the next chunk of verses. We're going to go 20-30 here today. I'm going to give you a brief recap of verses 1-19 for those of you that were not with us a couple weeks ago, or those of you that were with us a couple weeks ago, and to be honest, can't really remember what we talked about. I know you exist, you're in here, it's okay. We're going to give a quick recap of the first 19 verses. There is a king over God's people, and his name is Jehoshaphat. Great name. I'm not sure, Powell's, if you're still debating on a name for your baby girl, but this one is a great name. Jehoshaphat is the king of God's people, and he is celebrated back in chapter 17 as one of the good kings. He's a good leader. God's people are in a healthy place. They're expanding. Things are going well. But we find at the very beginning of chapter 20, things were going well, and then there was an announcement that came to Jehoshaphat that changed everything. He is told that there are 3 enemy armies that are marching towards him to fight him and to wipe out his people. And what makes bad news worse is when they give the location of these armies, they're a day's march away. It's not like they had weeks or months to prepare, or there's some rumblings that these people are upset at you. No, they are almost here, and he's just blindsided by this announcement. And so this is a scary moment. It says in verse 3 that Jehoshaphat is terrified, and yet in his terror, he seeks the Lord for help. We talked extensively about where does your fear drive you? A lot of times we downplay that like fear is always wrong, it's always bad, but we see this man of God who is a man of God, but he has fear, but his fear drives him to the presence of God. And he begins to declare and rehearse who God is. He starts singing Waymaker, Miracle Worker, like he's singing these things about God. He's declaring, you are this is who you are, this is what you've done, this is what you said, this is how we've seen you faithful in the past. And as they declare who God is, he says, now here's my situation. I don't know what to do, so I'm looking to you for help. I believe that you are a God whose promises are going to remain true in my life. God shows up and says, I see you, and I'm going to be with you. This battle is not yours. This battle is mine. Lacks the details of how God's going to take care of this battle, but God says, I see you, and I'm with you in this battle. And so this is news enough to send Jehoshaphat and the entire nation goes from terror to now they begin worshiping. Talks about they get on their knees, and then after a while they're on their knees just humbly thanking God, that there's excitement that is stirring inside of them, and they stand to their feet and they are shouting, and they are essentially throwing a victory parade before the battle even begins. That in verses 3, they're terrified. In verse 19, they're celebrating. When nothing circumstantially has changed, they have just rehearsed and recalled the character of their God. God has said, I'm with you. And although I'm not telling you the details of how this battle will be won, I'm going to tell you I'm with you in the battle. And the presence of God, even in unchanged circumstances, changed the status of their soul. They went from terrified to confident. Not because the enemies changed their mind, not because there wasn't a battle to fight tomorrow, but because the presence of God was with them. Now, we're going to pick up right there, where the battle is still imminent. They are now having to march towards this battle, and all they know is God's with them. They don't know how this is going to play out, but God is with them. Let's jump into verse 20. Before we jump into that, I just want to just take a moment to say, how could this relate to us even before we jump into this content? I don't know what your battles you may be facing today could look like. I think some of you, the battle that you are facing tomorrow is a difficult decision to make. For some people, it is a conflict in marriage. For some people, the battle is financial. It's with employment. For some people, it's a physical diagnosis that you've been faced. For some people, you got the phone call recently of a tragedy and you don't know how you're going to get through this. I think that these situations that we see going on in Scripture here, it can show up in various ways in your life, but I want you to know that we have a God who sees, and we may not have all the details of what it's going to look like on the other side, but God is with you and He is for you, and we can celebrate and worship Him in the midst of these challenges. Jump into verse 20 here with me. It says, early the next morning, the army of Judah went out into the wilderness of Tekoa. On the way, Jehoshaphat stopped and he said, listen to me, all you people of Judah and Jerusalem, believe in the Lord your God, and you will be able to stand firm. Believe in His prophets, and you will succeed. So they get up in the morning, and they begin their journey towards the three armies. Somewhere along the line, Jehoshaphat's looking around and said, hey, we were pretty excited in the morning, but something is changing in the demeanor of his troops, because he recognizes they need to pull over and have a pep talk. Any parents ever have this moment when you're on a car ride and it's time to pull over and have the pep talk? We recently were driving up to Lake Mary Ronan, and we got in the car. The kids are excited. We have a game plan of how this is going to be a successful family drive. We've got an audiobook downloaded. We've got the iPads charged up. Like, we got some coloring pads. Like, we know we are prepared for this drive up to Lake Mary Ronan. Before we got to Polson, we had to pull off into a scenic turnout, not to take in the view, but to have a family pep talk. Like, kids, if you don't stop wrestling back there, we are going to lose our minds. We had to have a parent-to-parent pep talk. Like, this is not going according to plan. This wasn't just the kids. We needed a pep talk. Like, let's pull it together, family. We can make it an hour and 40 minutes without killing each other. I believe this. Parents, you know the pull-over pep talk. Jehoshaphat sees this moment. Like, they were excited. They just had a victory parade. Hopes were high. Like, things were going well. And he looks around and is like, it doesn't seem like we've got the same confidence. So he pulls over and he gives them a pep talk. This is the next day. They needed a reminder of the faithfulness of God. Because, as we read, they are currently in the wilderness. They were home, they had a promise from God, and they've yet to see the results of this promise, and they're in this season in between of the wilderness. Now, the wilderness can be a geographical location, and to the Israelite community, it has a history of what the wilderness meant. But I want to tell you, even in our lives today, we often can find ourselves in the wilderness. The wilderness being the space in between the promise of God and seeing the victory. The space between God speaking faith and confidence that I am with you, I am for you, and actually seeing the other side of the conflict. That it can be so easy to be excited when we hear the promise. Yes, my faith is high. I heard that sermon, or we had that conversation, or someone prayed with me, or I read that verse, and I'm feeling the faithfulness of God is stirring up inside of me. But as time goes on, doesn't it seem that because circumstances maybe have not yet changed, our confidence in the promises of God begin to diminish? It's called the wilderness, the space in between the promise and the fulfillment. Maybe you're here today and you have heard the promises of God, that He is good, that He is for you, that He is faithful, that you're going to make it, and you've heard this encouragement. But time has gone on and you don't see any circumstantial changes, and maybe you're starting to wonder, was that true? Was it worth celebrating the promise back then when I haven't seen the results I was looking for today? What does it look like when you are in the wilderness, the space in between the promise and the results? And in this moment, as they were in the wilderness, the content of their pep talk was this: believe. He tells them again, believe in the Lord your God and you will stand firm. Believe in His prophets and you will succeed. It was a pep talk about belief. He looks around and says, hey guys, don't you dare let doubt creep in. Don't you start questioning the character of God. Don't start questioning His faithfulness. He is who He said He is. He will do what He said He will do. And maybe this is the pep talk you need today in your wilderness. Don't you let doubt creep in. Don't you start questioning the faithfulness of God. Don't start questioning the character of our God. He is who He said He is. He will do what He said He will do. We must believe. I love that their pep talk was belief is what would bring success, not how hard you're going to have to fight is going to bring you success. He says believe. Now I want to say that there's oftentimes this conflict between, is following Jesus about belief or is it about behavior? So we got to behave a certain way, or do we believe a certain way? I want to tell you that belief always comes first. That belief is what dictates behavior. How many of you know you can behave a certain way and not believe in that behavior? But you cannot believe a certain way and not let it affect the way that you live. That behavior follows belief. So behavior matters. And when it comes to sin, sin is harmful. We are called to resist. We are called to flee. We are called to pursue holiness. That there is behavior to talk about, and behavior that does matter in following God. But I want to tell you that what comes first and primary is belief. He says, if you really believe the faithfulness of God, if you believe He called us to march towards the enemy tomorrow, you will behave in that way. Not because your behavior is going to save you, but because you believe in the promises of God enough to move forward in obedience to what He's called you to do. That belief dictates behavior, especially sustained behavior. We can all behave a certain way for a certain time, but if it's going to be a lifestyle, it has to come first from believing. Believing is the focus. And once they believe, then they behave. Verse 21 says, after consulting the people, the king appointed singers to walk ahead of the army, singing to the Lord and praising Him for His holy splendor. The king appointed singers to walk ahead of the army, singing the Lord and praising Him for His holy splendor. Keep in mind, he is going to war against 3 armies with their weapons, their spears, that they're going to physically battle. And the position that he appoints at the very, very front, the most dangerous position, is singers. It's his worshipers. Not the guys with swords, not the guys with all the muscles and the weapons and the training experience. He places the dudes with the smooth falsetto who can sing harmony together at the very front. This is nuts. Maybe not the most ideal battle strategy. What he does, he's got this whole battalion of warriors, of an army, and who he puts at the very front is the Backstreet Boys. He's like, hey, you guys lead the way. You guys can sing real smooth. How does this go down? Like battle we're just hours away from battle. Who gets the front lines? These guys have been training their whole lives to go to war. And then you got these like 5 dudes sitting over there just like harmonizing together. And Jehoshaphat, he's like, who's going to go to the front? And he starts calling out, AJ, Nick, Brian, Howie, Kevin. Don't judge me for knowing the Backstreet Boys' names. He called like, you guys, front lines. Like this has got to be so offensive to the military. Those of you who have military experience, this has got to be offensive that this is who goes in the front. This is who is leading the charge. But he puts worshipers, he puts singers at the very, very front lines as they march towards the enemy. This doesn't seem like an ideal strategy, but he puts the band on the front lines. To be honest, this is what we do every single week when we gather together. What goes first is worship. What goes first is our musicians, because worship is warfare. Because worship moves the heavenlies. Worship is not just karaoke together. Worship is engaging in the spiritual realm that we cannot see. It is engaging with what heaven is doing. It is tapping into his heart. It is tapping into his power. That worship is warfare. And so Jehoshaphat, this actually on the surface can seem like a ridiculous strategy, but he understands the heart of God. What moves the heavenlies, what activates the power of God is when we put ourselves not in a position of our strength going first, but humbly saying, God, we need your presence to lead the way. And they lead with worship. And it says, this is what they sang. I love we get the lyrics to this song. They sing this: give thanks to the Lord, his faithful love endures forever. A 10-word song, which I love. It's simplicity, repetition of just 10 words that are moving you, are speaking and declaring what your soul needs to hear, just repeating over and over and over. In this situation, the challenge that lies before them, what they continue to repeat is, we're giving thanks to God because his love endures forever. Their battle cry is God's love for them. I want to tell you, this is what you sing in your battles. This is what you repeat in your battles. This is what you declare in your battles. God, I thank you right now that your love for me is steadfast. It is enduring. We do not declare our love. We do not declare our faithfulness. We do not declare our commitment. We do not declare our intentions because they are weak, they are fragile, and we are not going to fulfill them. But what we do declare is the faithfulness of his love. What's going to sustain you through tomorrow's battle is not your strength. It's not your effort. It's not your love for God. What will sustain you is reminding yourself of his unfailing love towards you. God, thank you for your steadfast love that is better than life. Let me remind you, they have not yet seen their victory, but they're already thanking God and declaring his love for them. I want to tell you, there is power in giving thanks before you see the provision. There is power in giving thanks to God while you are in the in-between, because even while you are in the in-between, he is still worthy right there. He is not worthy because of the promise and the promise alone. He's not only worthy when he's fulfilled the promises, he is worthy in the in-between. And sometimes what you need when you are in that wilderness between the promise and the results is to remind yourself, I've felt it before and I know I'll feel it again, but today, even though I don't feel it, I will rehearse and I will declare that his love for me is steadfast, it is enduring, it exists today as much as it did back then, that his steadfast love is better than life, and I will begin to thank him that he is with me and thank him for the provision he's going to bring me. It says in verse 22, at that very moment, worshipers go to the front, sing 10 words about the faithfulness of God. At that very moment that they began to sing and give praise, the Lord caused the armies of Ammon and Moab and Mount Seir to start fighting amongst themselves. This is amazing. At that very moment. Now I want to put us in the context of the story. The Israelite army cannot see the other 3 armies yet. There is a mountain that they're climbing between them. They're getting close, but they can't see. So as they are marching towards their enemy with uncertainty of how God is going to provide, they're declaring his faithfulness, his love, and they cannot see what happens while they worship. But at that very moment, something begins to shift. That worship is warfare, and it's moving the heavenlies. And victory, I want to tell you, victory is not achieved when we arrive. Victory is achieved when we are engaged with the presence of God, even in the in-between. They cannot see what is happening, but they are worshiping and they are engaged with the presence of God, and victory is beginning to happen on their behalf. Now, I want to tell you, in your situation, absolutely read the book, seek the counseling, do the work, but first, engage the presence of God. Your victory is not going to come when you just learn more information on how to be a better you. Victory comes when you engage the presence of God, even in the in-between. And you may not see what is happening on the other side of that mountain you're climbing, but victory is happening as we engage with the presence of God. It says, when they sang, meaning God made the promises, God is doing the heavy lifting, but they still engaged. They did something, and what they did was set their affections on his love for them. They declared God's love, and he earns the victory, but I'm so grateful that God allows us to participate in it. Again, for all they know, there's 3 armies on the other side marching towards them. They can't see what's going on, and this is so often our view. We have no idea if the way that we're operating, the way that we're worshiping, the way that we're engaging the presence of God, we don't often know if this is accomplishing anything. But as they climbed, and as they sang, as they kept reminding themselves and reminding each other that our God is faithful, and we're going to thank him for who he is, even though we don't know how this story ends. As they sang and as they climbed, verse 23, the armies of Moab and Ammon turned against their allies from Mount Seir, and they killed every one of them. And then, after they had destroyed the army of Seir, they began attacking each other. So when the army of Judah arrived at the lookout point in the wilderness, all they saw were dead bodies lying on the ground as far as they could see. Not a single one of the enemy had escaped. What a wild story. What a wild story. My curiosity wants to know, how'd the last guy die? Like, how'd this happen? You know, did the last 2 alive like stab each other at the same time and it was over? Or did like one guy become the last guy standing? He's like looking around and like he trips and falls on a sword or something. Like, how's this go down? Somehow they all died. No one's left standing. What a wild situation. And put yourself in the shoes of Jehoshaphat's army as they are marching up. The intensity that is arising. They know as soon as they get to this spot, they're going to get a lookout where they can see the other 3 armies that they know are stronger than them, bigger than them. They have no idea how they're ever going to beat them. So the adrenaline that is rising as they get to the lookout. And as they go and as they get to the top and they're ready to see the enemy, when they anticipate an overwhelming opposition, what they see is an unearned victory. All they did was worship their way up the mountain. And when they expected to have to fight a battle they did not know how they were going to win, they see that God had already provided the victory for them. I want to tell you, this is such a beautiful picture of the gospel of Jesus. That when we thought we had to be good enough, be strong enough, overcome sin, overcome temptation, when it was on us to beat the sin and the temptation in our lives, when we get to the spot where we look at what God has done, we see that he has already provided a victory that we could not provide ourselves, that he has overcome the enemy of sin. He has provided forgiveness. He has provided a hope for us that we could not earn on our own. I think so often religion says you got to go fight a battle that's impossible for you to win, but give all of your effort towards it, when the beauty of the gospel is saying, when we don't put our faith in our own efforts and our own abilities, but we recognize the gift that Jesus is to us, and we put our faith and our confidence in his love for me instead of my love for him, we get to see an overwhelming enemy that we did not have the power to beat ourselves, already defeated for us. This is the beauty of the gospel. Maybe you're here today and you're somewhere between who you are and who you want to be, where there is this distance between what you feel like God has called you to be or what you strive to be, but you cannot get there on your own. I want to tell you, even after years or decades of striving, trying to be better, trying to overcome that temptation, trying to beat that addiction, trying to make that marriage work on your own, maybe you are somewhere in the between. I want to tell you, the victory does not come just from your own effort. It is going to come when you engage with the presence of God and He enters the situation and you see a victory available for you that He has already won. I love that it even gets better than just beating sin. Verse 25 says, King Jehoshaphat and his men, they went out to gather the plunder. They found vast amounts of equipment, clothing, and other valuables, more than they could carry. There was so much plunder that it took them 3 days just to collect it all. This is amazing. Not only do they get to the top and recognize the battle has already been won for them, now they get to go into where they thought the battle was going to be. And instead of having loss, instead of them maybe losing their own lives or some of their friends losing their lives or whatever could have played out, instead of this, what they do is they go and they just take the plunder from the enemy. This is just like God. To not just overcome the enemy, to provide for us a plunder that we didn't work for, we didn't earn, we didn't deserve. I want to tell you this, there's this beautiful scripture that says that the wages of sin is death, but the free gift of God is eternal life through Jesus. I love that there is a gift, there is a plunder on the other side of not just defeating sin, but God giving us life abundant and life eternal. And I love that it took them 3 days to collect. There's a lot that we could dig into here, but I want to make it this simple. I love that when Jesus went to the cross and He gave His life for us, that He overcame sin. He took upon Himself my sin and your sin. He paid the penalty for sin. Therefore, sin is dealt with. The enemy is defeated, but it gets better because Jesus' story doesn't end there. He goes to the grave, and for 3 days, there is the building of this plunder that we get to live in today, that not just is sin defeated, but now we get to reap the rewards of what took 3 days to collect, and it is life abundant, and it is life eternal. We have enough to worship God for the fact that sin has been defeated, but then we add on top of that the plunder that we get for the battle that He fought, that I deserved death and hell, separated from God forever, but the free gift of God is not just forgiveness, but is life abundant and life eternal. I don't know about you, that makes me say, He's worthy. I think I ought to worship Him. I think He's worth following. I think that maybe some of my circumstances aren't working the way that I want to, but I've got a Jesus who has already, it's not up for debate, He has already done this. He already took my sin. He already rose from the grave. He has already offered me a gift that took 3 days to collect. I say we walk in it. We receive it. And then verse 26, it says, on the 4th day, they gathered in the valley of blessing, which got its name that day because the people praised and thanked the Lord there. It is still called the valley of blessing today. Then all the men returned to Jerusalem, with Jehoshaphat leading them, overjoyed that the Lord had given them victory over their enemies. What an amazing journey back. Anybody who has played sports, you remember what it was like to have an away game against the rival team and you beat them? That bus ride back, isn't that just the best moment ever? Where the battle is over, you beat them, and you're just reminiscing, oh, when you took that jumper in the corner, or when you took that guy out, like you just reminisce, and it's just like this delight. I love that they have this on such an extreme level. They left not knowing if they would return alive. They left not knowing if they'd see their wives and their children again. But not only did they find victory over the enemy, they are coming back with all of this plunder that took 3 days to collect. And they are reminiscing the goodness of God and reminding themselves of how incredible God's provision is all the way back home. And it says in verse 28, they marched into Jerusalem to the music of harps, lyres, and trumpets. And they proceeded to the temple of the Lord. They didn't just go back to their own homes. They start counting out the money and the provisions that they got. No. They were so captivated by the goodness and the grace of God that they make it back home, and they just got to get back in church. They got to get back within the temple in the presence of God. And this cycle of worship begins to take over their lives because they worship not just at the promise. They worship not just at the victory. They worshiped in the in-between. And then God's faithfulness is on display, and it produces more worship. And His faithfulness is on display, and it produces more worship. It's this cycle we get into where we begin to believe and see the faithfulness that God's grace comes upon grace, and His grace yesterday was amazing, but there's another level of grace today, and tomorrow we get to experience it again. And there's just this cycle of worship that's drawn out of us, not based on our circumstances, but because His love is better than life. And I see it again and again and again, and it just begins to captivate my heart and my life, and they worship and they worship and they worship. In verse 29, it says, when all the surrounding kingdoms heard that the Lord Himself had fought against the enemies of Israel, the fear of God came over them. I'm going to ask the band if you'll join me. It says the surrounding kingdoms, they also heard of the faithfulness of God, and fear of God came over them. I love that through this story, the message of God and the faithfulness and the character of God spreads to the nations because of the power of a community of worshipers. That the character and the fame and the fear of God spreads, not because of people that fought really hard and were super disciplined, not because of some really good preachers, because of a community that worshiped in the in-between. A community that recognized what we need to speak and declare and remind ourselves today is about God's faithful love towards us. And the story goes that now nations are hearing of the goodness of God. I wonder how much influence is lost in our lives because we fight instead of worship. Now, again, I think that belief ought to lead to behavior. So I'm not saying don't fight, don't work, don't move in obedience in these areas that you're battling in your life. But I wonder how much influence is lost because we don't lead with worship. I wonder in your broken marriage, how much influence is lost because as much as you're trying and you're reading the books and you're trying to be a better communicator, and you're seeking counseling, I think these are great, but how much influence is lost because you haven't worshiped together? You haven't sat down and held hands and declared the goodness of God that you've experienced together, and you just worship Him. I know it's hard right now, and I don't know how we're gonna get to the other side of this, but we need to recall and rehearse the faithfulness of God. How much influence is lost in your family, with your children that seem to be going so distant than the way that you intended to raise them? How much influence is lost? Not because you're not trying, but what about worshiping with them? What about worshiping over them? What about saying, God, I don't know what to do. I'm looking to You for help, and I'm gonna declare the faithfulness of who You are. I remember when we dedicated that child to You and we made these declarations and these promises and we heard this word from You. I'm standing on it today. And I'm worshiping You because Your steadfast love for my child is better than life. How much influence is lost in our businesses, in our finances, in our battle against addiction and sin and temptation? How much influence is lost because it's all on my shoulders to be better? What if we worshiped in the in-between? The influence at the end of the story is just astounding because they chose to be a people of worship. And I love that God turned this fearful encounter into an opportunity to reach the nations. This was a terrifying set of experiences, not knowing how the story was going to play out, but God used it to reach the nations. Now, I'm not willing to say that the challenge that you're facing today is from God. And to be honest, a lot of the challenges that we face are a result of our own sinfulness. But maybe God is able to use this challenge that you're facing today to reveal His love for Missoula, to reveal His faithfulness to your family. What if God is able to use this challenge to let the goodness of His name be spread to those observing? I just truly believe that God can use our seasonal discomforts to reach the lost. And it's in those moments that we have a choice to say, God, here's my will. Fix all of this. Make everything easy for me. Or we could say, not my will, but Yours be done. Would we even be willing to say, God, I declare you're faithless. I'm not backing down on my faith that you're going to provide. But since I'm facing this mountain, how can you use this to not just get me out of it, but how can you use this situation to influence those around me? How can you use this to build up faith and confidence, to speak your goodness to those who need your hope? Final verse 30 says, so Jehoshaphat's kingdom was at peace, for his God had given him rest on every side. Sounds good to me. Rest. The story starts with terror and ends with peace and rest. I don't want to diminish the size of your challenge or the pain that you may be experiencing. I don't want to just stand up here and mindlessly promise a miracle. But I do see consistently the power of walking forward in obedience, the power of choosing to worship in the in-between. There may be a hill to climb and an enemy to face tomorrow. There may be some work to be done, but we do not just get to work without being worshipers first. He is worthy in the midst of your challenge. He's worthy in the midst of the hill that you are climbing. He's worthy in the midst of the wilderness. We don't know what God's doing on the other side. And again, I don't want to promise something that I can't promise, but we don't know what our worship is doing. We don't know what's happening on the other side of the mountain, but we can be of those that keep climbing, that keep thanking him, that keep declaring his love, that keep focusing on his love, that keep reminding ourselves of his faithfulness, that keep encouraging each other about his faithfulness, that keep just speaking and declaring the character of our God. And we are not going to be of those that lose hope in the in-between. If you're willing and able, would you stand with me? Maybe today you're here in this room or you're watching online and you wouldn't consider yourself a follower of Jesus. You're not a Christian. I don't want to recite the simple gospel back to you. That God loved you so much that he was unwilling to just let you suffer the consequences of your sin. He provided a way out. And the way is Jesus, who came to this earth, lived a sinless life, took on our sin, went to that cross for us. And he didn't just defeat sin on our behalf. He rose from the grave, which provides you not just forgiveness, but it provides you life abundant and life eternal. It is a gift that you do not have to work for. It is a free gift of God to all who will receive. And we believe that this life of following Jesus, it's a life of faith. And faith will produce changed behavior. Faith does produce a changed lifestyle. But what brings you salvation, what brings you forgiveness and hope is believing that this is the gospel that is available to you. Maybe you're here today and today's the day where you just say, Jesus, I got a lot of questions. There's a lot I don't know, but I want to receive that free gift. Will you please forgive me? I want to become a follower of you. That may spark even more questions than you came in here with, but I want to tell you, it's not about having all of your questions figured out. There's not going to be a test to access eternity in his presence. It is faith that he is who he said he is. Maybe today you're here and faith is stirring inside of you. I'm going to tell you, you don't have to say a certain words. You don't have to say a certain prayer. You don't have to have a pastor pray with you. Right where you're at, you are in the presence of God. And I believe you're here today because he is already drawing you unto himself. Today can be the day where you experience forgiveness, hope, life abundant, and life eternal. Those of you that are here today and you are a follower of Jesus, those of you that are watching online as well, you consider yourself a Christian. I want to challenge you to respond today. And I don't know what your challenge is, what you're battling, what the in-between looks like for you. But I want to challenge you, would you take these few more minutes before we dismiss and we go about the rest of our weekend? Would you be a worshiper first? Might be a good idea to get that book. It might be a good idea to schedule that counseling. I'm all for the behaviors, but it comes from belief first. And today in these moments, you're going to be a worshiper first. would you take these moments to declare the goodness of God, to remind yourself of His faithfulness, His provision. I'm going to ask Jeff and Diet as we sing again, if you'll come back over to the prayer table. Maybe today you need someone to join you in prayer. Maybe as we talk today, there's something stirring inside of you and you need to come together with someone else of faith. You need the church praying for you. Maybe you didn't fill out a card before, but you need to before you leave today, or you need Jeff and Diet to join you and pray with you. We're going to give you that opportunity. We're going to sing one song. This is not just singing a song. This is giving you the opportunity to apply what we just said, to engage, to be a worshiper, to lead with worship as we march up the hill. And we do not know what God is doing on the other side, but we declare His faithfulness and His love. Lord, we love you. We declare your goodness. We declare your character. We got to thank you that you are moving right now, that you are at work. You are not idle. You are not distant, but you are present and you are at work. And right now, we declare who you are. We declare your love, your goodness, your faithfulness. Thank you that you engage in our battles. And Lord, right now we look to you for help. We love you and we worship you.